Welcome back. This is Courtney with C. Clark Creative. Thanks for joining me for today's ink blending and embossing card tutorial. I'm starting with some Bristol paper and ink blending with Distress Oxides. I'm using Mowed Lawn and pine needles and my good old trusty mini ink blending tools. I'm off the page, moving onto the page using circular motions. I've got my first color here, and then use a scrap piece of cardstock to hold that paper just so I don't get ink on my hands, and then transfer fingerprints onto my panel. So I load up my ink tool quite a bit for these first passes, get a lot of ink on, always starting off the page, moving onto the page, and then I'm going to start going back and forth between those two blending tools to kind of marry these two colors together, get a really good blend between the two. Each color goes about 3/4 of the way across the page. I will clean up the ink on my Kraft mat if I feel like it's going to start interfering with some of the blending. Here you can see the two panels, one that has been blended a little bit more together rather than that second one, and you see if you are not happy with your ink blending, just keep going, just keep blending. Just keep blending, just keep blending. Give yourself carpal tunnel. Not really, it's not that excessive. But just keep going with it. You do not need to keep adding ink. It's kind of intuitive. You kind of learn when you need to add a little bit to get these colors to blend together really well. And again, we are going to be embossing over this, so it does not need to be a perfect blend. So I have my Heat It tool just to help set the ink a little bit while those panels are drying. I'm going to get out some vellum and stamp on it. So I have the Holiday Greetings stamp set from the Stamp Market. Just getting this positioned on my Misty. I'm going to stamp this twice on the piece of vellum, one at the top, one at the bottom. That gets me 2 sentiments for these cards using my anti-static pouch, stamping in VersaMark, and then embossing in Ranger Gold embossing pattern. So you can see I flip that vellum over, use my anti-static powder tool again, and whenever I'm embossing, I generally stamp a few times just to make sure I've got a good impression. Now when you are embossing on vellum, vellum is a little on the delicate side. It's going to warp really easy. So what you need to do is get your heat tool hot, hot, hot. Let it preheat for a while. And then what you're going to do is put the heat on the vellum and then move the heat away. Put the heat on, move it away. You see, I kind of am moving back and forth with that heat tool. That keeps the amount of time that the vellum is under heat to a minimum, but I've got that heat blasting at that embossing powder, which is going to get it to react and melt together. So more heat, less time is kind of what we're doing here. I have a scrap of Tonic mirror card in Harvest Gold, so I'm cutting some 1/4" strips of that, and I'm going to use that to frame out that sentiment in a little bit. So I just checked my panels to see if they were ready to emboss on top of. So before doing anything, I just put a little bit of embossing powder on them. If the powder does not stick, the ink panel has dried sufficiently enough that you can emboss over the top of it and not have a bunch of excess embossing powder marring your card panel. That tree stamp is Catherine Pooler One Fine Pine background stamp. So I've got that embossed. I cut down these 2 card panels. I have A2 card bases from Gina Kraft cardstock, and I cut down the card panels to 4 inches by 5 1/4 on an A2 card. This will allow a 1/8 inch border all the way around that card panel, so that lets that Harvest or the Kraft cardstock frame out that panel. I take my sentiment vellum that I have trimmed down and put a very thin strip of glue on the top and the bottom. I am going to cover up this little bit of glue with my mirror cardstock, which is why I did a 1/4 inch so that I could make sure it was wide enough to cover up that bit of glue holding down that vellum. Put one at the top, one at the bottom. Now when I cut initially my vellum and this mirror card, I cut it at the full 4 1/4 inches. So that's why I have a little bit of overhang. No problems. I just put that into my trimmer and cut that excess off after it's glued. I have a double-sided adhesive on the back of my card here, just putting up these tabs at the corner so I can position the card panel onto my card base, and then once it's in position, I just pull those tabs out and my card panel is perfectly aligned. So there you've got it. There's a close-up of this embossing. I love how these cards turned out. Hope you're having a great holiday season, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.